Lily Brooks, a popular high school cheerleader, had it all: beauty, talent, and a promising future. Thomas Wilder, her trusted coach, seemed like a pillar of the community. But beneath the surface, their secret affair was about to unravel in the most horrifying way. When Lily's brutal murder sent shockwaves through the tight-knit town of Millfield, no one could have predicted the chilling truth that would soon come to light. The affair had turned deadly, and the person responsible was someone they never saw coming. The small, tight-knit town of Millfield was known for its charm. Its tree-lined streets, cozy homes, and friendly neighbors made it the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. It wasn't uncommon to see residents chatting in the local coffee shop or greeting each other by name as they went about their daily routines. Life here moved slowly, comfortably, and predictably. The town's high school was the center of its community, with local sports teams and extracurricular activities serving as the heartbeat of the area. Among the town's most admired figures was Lily Brooks, a bright, energetic high school cheerleader known for her radiant smile and sunny disposition. Lily seemed to embody everything the town cherished. She was smart, talented, and always surrounded by friends who adored her. Her popularity made her the face of Millfield High's cheerleading squad, and her presence at school events, pep rallies, and Friday night football games had made her a local celebrity. To the people who knew her, Lily was the perfect example of what it meant to be a teenager in Millfield: happy, successful, and free of worry. But on the evening of October 21st, that illusion was shattered forever. The police were called to a remote area of woods just outside of town after a passerby reported seeing something suspicious. When officers arrived, they discovered Lily's lifeless body lying in a clearing. The brutality of her death was evident, and the scene sent shockwaves through Millfield. How could something so horrific happen in a place that had always been so safe? As word spread, disbelief turned into grief. Lily's family, friends, and classmates were left in a state of shock, struggling to understand how this beautiful, promising young woman could have been taken so violently. At first, investigators thought the murder might have been a random act of violence. They combed through the woods for clues, searching for any sign of the killer. But as they began piecing together the puzzle, they quickly realized that this was no ordinary crime. Lily's death was personal. The investigation into her life revealed troubling details that no one in Millfield could have imagined. Behind Lily's perfect facade, there were secrets, dark, hidden corners of her life that she had kept concealed from the very people who thought they knew her best. Secrets that would soon unravel in a way no one could have predicted. The community's sense of security, once unwavering, crumbled in the wake of the murder. People whispered about the possible motives and the strange circumstances surrounding Lily's death. Something more sinister had been lurking beneath the surface, and as the investigation deepened, the shocking truth began to emerge. The seemingly peaceful town was about to be forever changed, and the story of Lily Brooks would haunt its residents for years to come. As the investigation into Lily Brooks' murder unfolded, detectives began to dive deeper into the young cheerleader's life, hoping to find clues that could explain why someone would want to harm her. What they found, however, wasn't just a trail of superficial friendships or the picture-perfect life that many in Millfield had assumed. Beneath the surface, Lily had been living a secret life, one that she had carefully guarded from the public eye. The more the police uncovered, the clearer it became that Lily's world was far more complicated than anyone had ever imagined. Lily had always been the epitome of a high school star, intelligent, athletic, and adored by her peers. On the outside, it seemed like she had everything going for her. But in private, Lily had been struggling with the pressures of maintaining her perfect image. She had confided in only a few close friends that the constant demands of being a cheerleader, a student, and a social butterfly were starting to take a toll on her mental and emotional well-being. The attention and praise, once uplifting, had begun to feel like a heavy burden. In these quiet moments, Lily yearned for something more, something deeper than the applause and accolades. And that was when she had turned to Thomas Wilder. Wilder had been the head coach of the cheerleading team for several years, a respected figure within the school and the community. On the outside, he was the definition of professionalism, dedicated, hardworking, and seemingly invested in the success of his athletes. But as investigators began speaking to former students and faculty members, a different picture of Wilder began to emerge. Several had described him as intense, overly controlling, and at times overly familiar with the female students on his team. He had a way of making those around him feel special, chosen even, drawing them into his orbit and making them feel like they were the center of his attention. For Lily, that attention had felt like the escape she had been craving. What had started as a mentor-mentee relationship had slowly, almost imperceptibly, crossed a line. There were whispers, of course, but no one had dared to confront the growing connection between the coach and the cheerleader. No one had wanted to believe that their beloved coach, someone who was trusted by the town and the school, could be involved in something so inappropriate. Lily's friends, too, had noticed the shift in her behavior. She had become more distant, secretive, and withdrawn. But she refused to open up, shutting down any attempts to discuss her changing mood. It wasn't until after her death that they realized the extent of the emotional turmoil Lily had been hiding from them all. The secret affair between Lily and Wilder was a powder keg waiting to explode, and no one, not even Lily, could predict the devastating consequences that would unfold. What seemed like an innocent attraction between a young girl and an older mentor had spiraled into something far darker, setting the stage for a tragedy that would rock Millfield to its core. As detectives dug further into Thomas Wilder's past, they began to uncover unsettling details that painted a far darker picture than the town had ever imagined. On the surface, Wilder was the model coach, dedicated, committed, and widely respected in Millfield. But beneath that polished exterior, there were signs of something far more sinister. Those who had worked with him described him as a man who thrived on control, not just on the field but in every aspect of his life. His success with the cheerleading team was largely due to his ability to manipulate and dominate the girls he coached, using his position of power to create a sense of dependency. Wilder's controlling nature was subtle but pervasive. He had a way of making the girls on his team feel special, making them believe they were more than just athletes. They were his chosen ones. He would praise them endlessly, pushing them to be the best, but always with the undertone that they owed him their success. As the investigation revealed, it was this very dynamic that had drawn Lily in. She had been flattered by his attention, and at first, his mentorship had felt like a lifeline. But over time, that dynamic had shifted into something much more manipulative. What had started as a professional relationship quickly blurred the lines, and it became clear that Wilder had used his authority to foster a sense of emotional dependence in Lily. He had isolated her from her friends, making her feel as though she couldn't trust anyone but him. Lily had been caught in a web of emotional manipulation, and her growing feelings for Wilder had complicated everything. What might have seemed like harmless admiration at first had turned into a dangerous obsession on his part, and Lily too had become emotionally entangled, unable to break free from his hold. Despite the outwardly perfect nature of their relationship, there were warning signs that Lily's world was not as ideal as it seemed. Her friends had started to notice her subtle changes. She had become withdrawn, increasingly distant from the people who had once been her closest companions. She had stopped attending social gatherings and had isolated herself from the rest of the cheerleading team. More concerning, however, were the emotional shifts. Lily, once the epitome of confidence and positivity, had begun to show signs of anxiety and distress. The girl who had always been the center of attention now seemed anxious, tired, and distracted. While Lily had tried to keep the affair a secret, there were moments when her friends saw glimpses of her struggles. One of them recalled a conversation where Lily had hinted that she was feeling overwhelmed, but she never revealed the full extent of what was happening with Wilder. Her secrecy only deepened as the months went on, and the more she withdrew, the more Wilder tightened his grip on her. His possessiveness and jealousy began to surface as he grew increasingly anxious about the potential exposure of their relationship. It was in these quiet moments, in the small signs and the subtle changes in her behavior, that Lily's friends began to sense that something was terribly wrong. But by the time they started to realize the gravity of the situation, it was too late. The carefully hidden relationship between Lily and her coach had already spiraled beyond control, and the town was on the brink of a tragedy no one could have anticipated. The discovery of Lily's body sent shockwaves through Millfield. The news spread like wildfire, and soon, the small town was gripped by a mixture of grief and disbelief. How could something so horrific happen in a place that had always felt so safe? The police were quick to cordon off the area where Lily's body had been found, a secluded patch of woods just outside town. It was clear that her death had been violent. She had suffered severe trauma, and the scene suggested that the murder was personal. But what wasn't clear was why it had happened or who would want to harm such a beloved young woman. The initial response from law enforcement was to treat the murder as a random act of violence. Millfield had always been a town with little crime, and the idea that a young girl could be murdered in such a brutal manner felt foreign to everyone. The police launched an investigation, speaking to anyone who might have information, but no immediate leads seemed to surface. There were no obvious signs of a struggle at the scene, and the woods where Lily had been found were a common area for people to walk. It seemed at first that the crime could have been committed by an unknown stranger. However, as investigators began to review the details of Lily's life, the case began to take on a different tone. They spoke with family, friends, and classmates to piece together her final days. While there were no obvious threats or signs of imminent danger, one detail stood out. Lily had been receiving strange, cryptic messages in the days leading up to her death. The messages, sent from an anonymous number, expressed anger and frustration, warning her to end something she had been involved in. The tone of the messages was chilling, suggesting that someone close to her was feeling betrayed. The more detectives dug into Lily's personal life, the more it became apparent that she had been hiding something. Her relationship with Thomas Wilder, the cheerleading coach, began to emerge as a key focal point. At first, it was dismissed as gossip, a rumor that had circulated in hushed whispers. But as investigators scrutinized her phone records and social media accounts, it became clear that Lily had been involved in a secret, deeply personal relationship with Wilder. The messages that she had received before her death had been from him, disguised behind an anonymous number. It was a chilling revelation. The man who had been her mentor, her coach, and someone she had trusted, was now potentially the one who had been threatening her. This discovery shifted the direction of the investigation dramatically. What had initially appeared to be a random act of violence now seemed much more personal. The motive was no longer just about a senseless crime. It was about betrayal, jealousy, and a relationship that had taken a dangerous turn. The police soon realized they were dealing with something far more complex than they had anticipated. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the haunting truth started to surface. Lily's death was not an accident. It was the result of a deep and twisted secret that no one had seen coming. As the investigation deepened, the relationship between Lily Brooks and Thomas Wilder slowly emerged as the central piece of the puzzle. It was a connection that had been hidden in plain sight, carefully guarded by both parties, and one that no one in Millfield had suspected. For weeks, Lily's friends and classmates had noticed her withdrawal from the social circles she had once dominated. She seemed distant, even when surrounded by familiar faces, but it wasn't until her tragic death that the extent of her secret life began to unfold. Investigators soon realized that Wilder, the trusted coach of the cheerleading team, had been the one person who had held a powerful grip on Lily. In the days after Lily's murder, police had started to comb through her phone records, social media accounts, and any other personal items they could find. It was during this process that they discovered a series of messages between Lily and Wilder that painted a much darker picture of their relationship. The pair had been in constant communication, but the messages weren't the typical coach-athlete exchange that one might expect. They were personal, intimate, and in some cases, disturbing. Wilder had texted Lily numerous times, often demanding her attention and expressing a level of possessiveness that seemed out of place. It became apparent that the relationship between them had evolved far beyond a professional one. What had begun as a seemingly innocent mentoring relationship had turned into something much more dangerous. Wilder's grip on Lily grew stronger. With each passing day, and he became increasingly manipulative. Friends of Lily reported that she had become more isolated in recent months, pulling away from her friends and spending more time alone with Wilder. The once confident cheerleader, who had always been the center of attention, was now a shadow of her former self. She had confided in a few close friends, hinting at her struggles, but had never fully opened up about the depth of her involvement with Wilder. Her friends remembered the strange way Lily would light up when talking about him, but they also noticed a certain unease in her eyes, as if she knew something was wrong, but couldn't bring herself to confront it. As investigators continued to dig into the timeline of Lily's life, they uncovered more details that revealed a pattern of manipulation by Wilder. He had isolated her from her cheerleading teammates and discouraged her from spending time with her family or friends. Lily, once an outgoing and energetic young woman, had slowly been pushed into a corner. She began to pull away from everything she had once known and had started to confide in Wilder more than anyone else. It was clear to investigators that this wasn't just a romantic affair. It was a toxic, controlling relationship built on emotional manipulation and coercion. But there was another layer to this story that nobody had anticipated. Despite the control and secrecy surrounding their affair, Lily had begun to push back. She had started to show signs of wanting to break free. She had told a few people that she was planning to end the relationship, and that's when things took a darker turn. Wilder, who had been used to controlling every aspect of Lily's life, saw her attempt to regain control as an act of betrayal. He could not fathom the idea of losing her, and in his desperation to keep her in his grasp, something snapped. What had seemed like a quiet and secretive relationship was now exposed as the heart of Lily's tragic death. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer it became that Lily's murder was not just a random act of violence. It was a result of jealousy, manipulation, and a relationship gone horribly wrong. The hidden affair between the young cheerleader and her coach had finally come to light, and the town of Millfield, once blissfully unaware, was now facing the horrifying truth. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that the relationship between Lily Brooks and Thomas Wilder had spiraled into something far more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. While the town had been shocked by the discovery of the affair, the darker truth of Wilder's character began to take shape as investigators delved deeper into his past. What had appeared to be a mentoring relationship, albeit inappropriate, was now revealing itself as a tale of obsession, control, and jealousy. Wilder's actions, once seen as slightly odd or excessive by some, began to look more like the behavior of a man willing to go to extreme lengths to hold on to power over Lily, his athletes, and perhaps his own fragile ego. As investigators spoke with former students, colleagues, and others who had crossed paths with Wilder over the years, they began to see a troubling pattern. It wasn't just Lily who had fallen victim to his manipulations. There were other girls, other cheerleaders, who had been similarly influenced and isolated by him. Those who had left the team spoke of the pressure Wilder put on them, emotionally, mentally, and at times, physically. He was charismatic, persuasive, and knew exactly how to make his athletes feel indebted to him. He made them feel as though they owed their success to him, and in turn, they became entangled in a web of dependence on his approval. Wilder's personality was marked by a subtle, yet intense, possessiveness. He had a way of getting into the heads of the people around him, especially the girls on his team. His jealousy had been apparent in the way he reacted to even the smallest interactions between Lily and her peers. He was constantly monitoring her relationships, both inside and outside the cheerleading squad. If Lily spent too much time with other friends or showed too much independence, Wilder would lash out, either through passive-aggressive comments or more overt emotional manipulation. His controlling behavior extended to every part of Lily's life: what she wore, who she socialized with, and even how she spent her free time. The more detectives unearthed, the more they realized that Lily had been trapped in a cycle of fear and dependence on Wilder. His intense jealousy was becoming more suffocating as she began to show signs of wanting to break free. It seemed that every attempt Lily made to distance herself from him, even in small ways, was met with a swift response. Whether it was Wilder's disapproval, verbal confrontations, or more subtle threats, It was clear now that Lily's desire to end the relationship had triggered something in Wilder that pushed him over the edge. One of the most revealing pieces of evidence was Wilder's reaction to Lily's changing behavior. Those close to him reported that he had started to become increasingly erratic in the days leading up to her death. Friends and colleagues noticed that Wilder was showing signs of agitation and anger whenever Lily was mentioned. The more Lily pulled away, the more Wilder's control slipped through his fingers. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, of no longer being the center of her world. He had become obsessed with maintaining that control, even at the cost of her happiness, or even her life. By the time Lily had made the decision to end the affair, Wilder's jealousy had already reached a boiling point. He couldn't stand the idea of losing her to anyone, and that fear drove him to commit an unspeakable act. The depth of his manipulation and control had blinded him to any sense of reason. The man who had once been seen as a respected coach and mentor was now revealed to be a predator, his jealousy and possessiveness culminating in a violent, desperate act. For Lily, breaking free from his grip had become a matter of life or death. And, in the end, it cost her everything. As the investigation into Lily's murder continued, the focus shifted to the immediate aftermath of her death. The community of Millfield was in turmoil, struggling to comprehend the truth behind the tragedy. The police were no longer just looking for a random killer. They were now zeroing in on Thomas Wilder, the beloved cheerleading coach whose involvement with Lily had been hidden for so long. The discovery of his role in her life had sent shockwaves through the community, and now the authorities had to piece together the final, harrowing moments before her death. Wilder, who had been an exemplary coach in the eyes of most, was now a suspect in a murder investigation, and his actions after Lily's body was discovered raised more questions than answers. Initially, he appeared to be just as shocked as everyone else. He spoke to police and offered condolences to Lily's family, presenting himself as a concerned, grieving mentor. But there was something unsettling about his demeanor. Something that didn't quite match the gravity of the situation. His calmness in the face of such a brutal tragedy began to raise red flags. He showed no signs of panic or distress, nor did he seem particularly affected by the loss of a young woman he had allegedly been involved with. His composure seemed out of place, and the more the police observed him, the more they realized that his actions after Lily's death seemed scripted, almost rehearsed. Detectives began to scrutinize Wilder's movements in the hours before and after Lily's body was found. They learned that in the days leading up to the murder, he had been keeping a close eye on her. Wilder had been monitoring Lily's every move, knowing where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing. His obsessive need to control her extended beyond their private interactions and into her every day. Wilder's jealousy had grown, and he had become aware of Lily's plans to distance herself from him. The more she tried to break free from his grasp, the more desperate and erratic his behavior became. In the days before her death, Wilder had been sending Lily multiple messages, each one more desperate and angry than the last. His words were filled with threats, coercion, and a deep-seated fear of losing control over her. On the night of Lily's murder, investigators were able to track Wilder's movements through his phone and vehicle records. He had been in the vicinity of the woods where Lily's body was found at the time of her death. Though he initially claimed to have no idea how she ended up there, the evidence suggested otherwise. Wilder's car had been seen near the woods that night, and his phone had pinged in the area around the time of the murder. Despite his attempts to appear innocent, the evidence was beginning to stack against him. When confronted with the new information, Wilder's responses became increasingly defensive and erratic. His calm facade started to crack, and detectives began to see glimpses of the man behind the mask, a man whose obsession with Lily had led him down a dark path. His actions became more erratic, and he began to change his story, offering conflicting details about where he had been and what he had been doing. His initial attempts to downplay the significance of his relationship with Lily now seemed like an outright attempt to cover up the truth. It was clear to the detectives that the more they learned about Wilder's behavior, the less likely it seemed that Lily's death was the result of a random act of violence. Her murder, they believed, had been the culmination of months of emotional manipulation, jealousy, and control. Wilder's obsession had finally pushed him to the breaking point, and the tragic consequence was Lily's brutal death. The investigation was quickly closing in on him as the prime suspect, but it was still unclear whether the authorities could gather enough concrete evidence to bring him to trial. What was certain, however, was that the case was far from over, and Millfield's dark secret was about to be fully exposed. As the investigation progressed, the pressure on Thomas Wilder mounted. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Lily's murder, once a senseless and incomprehensible act of violence, now appeared to be a carefully calculated crime, fueled by obsession and control. Yet, the authorities needed more than circumstantial evidence. They needed a confession or a clear piece of hard evidence that could conclusively tie Wilder to Lily's death. While the detectives had established that Wilder had been in the area at the time of the murder and had been emotionally and psychologically connected to Lily, there was still a lingering question. Did they have enough to prove that he was the killer? Wilder's increasingly erratic behavior in the days following Lily's death had provided some important clues, but it wasn't until the forensic evidence came in that everything began to fall into place. DNA found at the scene, along with traces of Lily's blood in Wilder's car, were the smoking guns the investigators had been hoping for. It was clear that he had been present at the scene of the crime, and the physical evidence confirmed it. This new information was a game-changer. When Wilder was confronted with the forensic evidence, his facade finally began to crack. His previous attempts to deny any involvement in Lily's murder became more desperate and increasingly incoherent. At first, he tried to maintain his innocence, claiming that he had been at home the night of the murder. But as the details came to light, his story faltered. The blood on his car, the DNA at the crime scene, and his phone records all told the same story. He had been there. At this point, Wilder had no choice but to admit that he had been with Lily the night she was killed. But his confession was not a full one. It was laced with manipulation and deceit. Wilder's confession was chilling. He explained that Lily had been planning to end their affair, to break free from the hold he had over her. He claimed that he had been devastated by the thought of losing her, and in a moment of weakness he had confronted her in the woods. His version of events painted him as a man who had been overwhelmed by emotion, making an impulsive, regrettable decision in the heat of the moment. He described a struggle, a confrontation, but he was vague on the details, refusing to take full responsibility for the murder. Instead, he insisted that Lily had pushed him to the brink, that she had forced his hand. It was a classic example of manipulation, shifting the blame to the victim as if she had somehow caused her own death. As Wilder's confession unfolded, the detectives knew that they had finally cracked the case. His attempts to absolve himself of guilt were transparent, but they now had the evidence they needed to charge him with murder. The emotional and psychological grip that Wilder had held over Lily was clear in every aspect of his behavior, from his obsessive control over her to his final moments with her in the woods. The town of Millfield, once a place of peace and security, was now forever stained by the dark secrets that had been hidden in plain sight. The shocking truth of Lily's death had come to light, and with it, the full extent of Thomas Wilder's manipulation and cruelty. But even as the case seemed to draw to a close, there was one lingering question that haunted the investigators. How had Wilder managed to hide his true nature for so long? How had a man who was so skilled at manipulation managed to fool an entire community? And how had Lily been kept under his control for so long? The answers were now clear, but the toll of his actions would ripple through Millfield for years, leaving scars that would never fully heal. As Thomas Wilder's trial began, the town of Millfield was forced to confront the full scope of the tragedy that had unfolded within its quiet streets. The case that had started as a shocking murder of a beloved high school cheerleader had now become an intensely public spectacle. What had once been a close-knit community was now divided, torn between grief, anger, and disbelief. People who had known Wilder for years, who had trusted him as a coach and a mentor, were left grappling with the realization that someone they had held in such high regard had been capable of something so monstrous. Lily's death had shattered the illusion of safety and trust in Millfield, and the town would never be the same. In the courtroom, the prosecution painted a vivid picture of the toxic relationship between Wilder and Lily. The evidence presented was damning. The forensic evidence, Wilder's manipulative behavior, his obsession with Lily, and his attempts to shift the blame onto her in his confession. The prosecution highlighted the emotional and psychological hold Wilder had maintained over Lily, showing how he had isolated her from her friends and family, systematically breaking her down until she was completely dependent on him. It was a haunting reminder of how someone could manipulate another person into a corner so deep that escape seemed impossible. Lily's hope of freeing herself had ultimately cost her everything. The defense, on the other hand, painted Wilder as a man, overcome by emotion, a man who had lost control in a moment of rage. The defense, on the other hand, painted Wilder as a man overcome by emotion, a man who had lost control in a moment of rage. They claimed that while Wilder was undoubtedly guilty of a crime, he had not set out to kill Lily. They argued that her decision to end the affair had triggered an uncontrollable fit of jealousy, leading to a tragic impulsive act. The defense did everything they could to reduce Wilder's culpability, suggesting that he had acted out of character and that his actions were not premeditated. They painted him as a man who had loved Lily and had been devastated by her rejection, ultimately pushing him to commit the unthinkable. But the prosecution countered with the chilling reality of Wilder's behavior. They reminded the jury of the messages he had sent to Lily in the days leading up to her death, messages full of threats, desperation, and control. The investigators had uncovered a pattern of psychological abuse, where Wilder had systematically groomed Lily, making her believe that she could not live without him. His behavior wasn't the result of a momentary lapse in judgment, but rather the culmination of months of manipulation and obsession. The prosecution argued that Wilder had meticulously planned to silence Lily when she threatened to expose their affair and break free from his grasp. Throughout the trial, the community watched, horrified, as the details of Lily's life with Wilder were slowly revealed. Friends and family who had once admired him now found themselves questioning their own judgment. They had trusted him, supported him, and allowed him to be a part of their lives, not knowing the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. It was a sobering realization that someone they had regarded as a mentor could harbor such dangerous intentions. For Lily's family, the trial was a painful and emotional experience. Every day they were forced to relive the horrors of what had happened to their daughter. They sat through testimonies that described the manipulation Lily had suffered, and they listened as the defense tried to minimize Wilder's actions. It was an exhausting, heartbreaking ordeal, but they pressed on, determined to seek justice for their daughter. The case against Thomas Wilder was clear, and the evidence stacked against him seemed insurmountable. But the toll of the trial was felt by everyone involved. Millfield would forever be marked by the loss of Lily Brooks, a bright young woman whose life was taken too soon. The town, once full of hope and innocence, had been irrevocably changed by the secret affair between a cheerleader and her coach, and the brutal murder that had followed. The trial was far from over, but the pain it caused would linger in Millfield's collective memory for years to come. As the jury deliberated, the town of Millfield held its breath. For months, the community had been consumed by the tragedy of Lily Brooks' death, and now the fate of Thomas Wilder hung in the balance. The once beloved cheerleading coach, whose charm and mentorship had made him a fixture in the lives of so many, was now facing the full weight of his actions. The emotional toll on the community had been immeasurable. Friends, family, and students who had once idolized Wilder now found themselves grappling with the horrifying truth of his manipulation and betrayal. The trial, which had exposed the darkness lurking behind his carefully constructed persona, had left no one untouched. For Lily's parents, the days in the courtroom had been an unrelenting nightmare. Every testimony, every detail of their daughter's relationship with Wilder forced them to relive the loss of their precious child. They had been blinded by the trust they had placed in Wilder, just as so many others had been. They had never imagined that the man they had welcomed into their lives, the coach who had praised their daughter's potential, could be capable of such evil. It was a painful realization that cut to the core of their grief. Yet, in the midst of their heartbreak, they found strength in their pursuit of justice for Lily. They would not let her death be in vain. As the jury returned to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The air was thick with anticipation, as everyone knew that the verdict would determine the future of not just Thomas Wilder, but also the town of Millfield. For years, Millfield had been a place where people trusted one another, where secrets were rare and violence even rarer, but now the truth had shattered that illusion. It wasn't just the murder of a young girl that had upended everything. It was the revelation of a man who had preyed on his power, manipulated those around him, and caused irreparable harm. When the jury delivered its verdict, it wasn't a moment of victory, but of bitter relief. Thomas Wilder was found guilty of the murder of Lily Brooks. The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions. Some of the townspeople who had once supported Wilder expressed shock and disbelief, unable to reconcile the image of the man they had known with the monstrous figure now standing before them. Others, like Lily's family, felt a sense of finality, though it did little to heal the wounds left by her death. Wilder's sentence was a long one, but the justice that came with it did little to erase the scars he had left on the community. In the years that followed, Millfield slowly began to rebuild, but the town would never be the same. Lily's memory lingered in every corner, her cheerleading uniforms, her smile in photographs, the empty spaces where she had once lived. Her tragic death had become a cautionary tale, a story that no one would forget. And while the truth had been revealed, the damage done by Thomas Wilder's manipulation would echo through the lives of those who had been touched by it for years to come. The town of Millfield would always carry the weight of Lily's loss, but they had learned one painful lesson. Sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who can hurt you the deepest.